camera does not lie. That is something we tell ourselves. A camera captures light, converts it into data, and stores exactly what was in front of the lens at that exact second. No imagination, no fear, no tired brain filling in shapes from shadows, just light and math and truth. So when footage came back from the bottom of the world showing something large, pale, and moving through the blackest water on the planet, something that did not match any animal in any scientific database on Earth, the camera should have ended the argument before it started. It did not end it. It opened something far darker, because the footage raised a question that nobody in the room that day was prepared to answer. What do you do when the camera agrees with the witnesses, and the witnesses describe something that should not exist? The Southern Ocean sits at the bottom of the planet like a cold black ring encircling Antarctica, with no land to slow it down. Wind circles it endlessly. Waves here have crossed entire ocean basins without breaking on a single shore, and by the time they lift a ship, they carry the momentum of thousands of kilometers behind them. Sailors who have worked every other sea describe this one differently. They lower their voices. The latitude bands here earned their names over centuries of ships going south and not returning. The Furious 50s, the Screaming 60s. Those are not poetic nicknames. Those are warnings written in the logs of dead men. Beneath those waves sits a world that humans have barely touched. In 2025, 2 major research expeditions pushed into these waters with remotely operated submarines and came back with 30 new species that science had never seen before. 30 in a single expedition, including a carnivorous sponge now called the deathball sponge because it is covered in tiny hooks that trap and dissolve living prey. We found hydrothermal vents over 2,000 feet deep that nobody knew existed. We filmed coral gardens in complete darkness that have been growing for longer than recorded human history. The scientists who led those expeditions said the Southern Ocean is still extremely undersampled. That is the scientific way of saying we have barely looked, and every time we do look, something impossible turns up. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we have of the seafloor that lies beneath these waves. More people have walked on the moon than have descended to the deepest floor of the Southern Ocean. That is not an exaggeration. That is the simple arithmetic of how little we have explored the place where this story happens. Into that darkness, over the past 2 decades, something specific has been seen. Not by one person, not in one place, by multiple crews, on separate vessels, in different years, describing the same animal with the same features in the same waters. They call it the Ningen. The word is Japanese and it means human. That is the detail that makes this story impossible to walk away from. Not monster, not creature, human. Because the thing these witnesses keep describing does not look like any known animal in the catalog of Antarctic wildlife. It looks, they say, like us. Enormous, pale, built on a vertical plan with a rounded mass at the top that suggests a head, a broadening below it that suggests shoulders, and at the waterline something that moves the way a limb moves. Not a flipper held flat against a streamlined body, something that articulates, something that swings loose and slow the way an arm hangs when you're standing waist deep in still water. Now, before we go any further, let us be completely honest about where this story came from. The Ningen, as an internet legend, traces back to a Japanese message board called 2Channel around 2007, where anonymous users described whale research crews encountering pale humanoid figures in Southern Ocean waters. That origin matters. The most vivid images circulating online, the ones with 5-fingered hands and forward-facing eyes and a mermaid tail, are almost certainly fabricated. The sharpest portraits of the Ningen are illustrations polished by years of retelling until the legend hardened into a face. Honest investigators have to name that up front. A significant layer of this story is manufactured mythology, but here is where it gets complicated. Underneath the manufactured legend, before the internet images and the forums, there is an older record. Crew members on Japanese research and fishing vessels were describing something pale and enormous in Southern Ocean waters before any viral image existed. Those earliest accounts are not dramatic. They are flat and technical, the same tone a mechanic uses when a sound in an engine does not belong. They do not reach for drama, they reach for measurements. Investigators who study witness credibility will tell you that is the exact register of someone who has seen something real and is trying to communicate it accurately rather than impressively. The witnesses who have contributed to this file are not tourists on a cruise deck. The people who work the Southern Ocean are professionals in one of the most demanding environments on the planet. A fisheries observer on a commercial vessel spends months at sea handling the animals of the far south. He knows a fur seal from a leopard seal at 100 meters. He knows the blow pattern of a minke whale versus a fin whale. His entire professional value depends on not being fooled by what the sea shows him. A man like that does not report a pale giant in the water lightly. He reports it because saying nothing and carrying it alone has become worse than the embarrassment. When a trained observer tells you he saw something pale and enormous rise beside the hull and descend straight down, he is not doing it for attention. He's doing it because his catalog came up empty. The accounts that form the strongest part of this file share a specific cluster of features, not vague impressions, specific details that show up independently across different witnesses who never compared notes before they reported what they saw. First, the color. Every account agrees on a whiteness that was wrong for those waters. Not the white of a beluga whale, which has a blubbery, almost glowing quality. Not the belly flash of a breaching humpback, something smooth and even, almost skin-toned in the way it absorbed light, like something that had spent its entire life far from the sun. Second, the scale. Estimates from trained observers cluster around 20 to 25 meters for the visible portion above or just below the surface. That is larger than most known whale species. That approaches the length of the research vessels these people were standing on. Third, the absence of the markers that give away every known large animal of the Southern Ocean. No dorsal fin, no blow, no arching roll at the surface, no tail behavior consistent with any documented whale or seal. And fourth, the descent. Witnesses describe it the same way every time. Not a dive, not a tail flip exit. A smooth, controlled, vertical sinking, straight down, as if gravity had simply been inverted and the water closed over the spot without a ripple. That fourth detail is important. That is the detail that the simplest explanations cannot absorb, because that detail connects the eyewitness accounts to the most significant piece of evidence in this entire file, the piece that does not come from a person's memory at all. In the records of vessels working these waters during the years when the sightings cluster most densely, there are sonar returns. Depth sounder records, the most basic and least exotic technology on any commercial vessel. These instruments bounce acoustic pulses off the seafloor and off anything swimming between the hull and the bottom. They are used thousands of times a day to find fish and to avoid running aground. Nobody uses sonar to hunt monsters. Sonar is bookkeeping technology, and yet in these records, on at least several documented occasions in the deep water zones where the Ningen sightings are most concentrated, these instruments return something that the operators could not account for. Not a school of fish, which paints on a screen as a loose, scattered cloud of individual returns. Not the solid, flat line of the seafloor. A single, dense biological mass. One object, large, returning a strong, clean echo, hanging in the midwater column at a depth where nothing that size has any documented reason to be. And on one occasion that has been described in specific detail, that sonar contact did something that a piece of drift ice cannot do and a dead whale carcass cannot do. It changed depth. It rose. It held position. And then it descended again at a controlled, steady rate, vertically, in precisely the motion that the eyewitnesses had been describing with their own hands for years before anyone connected the two. A sonar contact is not a story. It is a physical measurement of a physical object displacing water and reflecting sound. The instrument does not get tired. It does not fill in shapes from imagination. It simply reports that something solid is present at this coordinate, at this depth. And now it has moved. The object was large, not person-sized, not car-sized. The estimates put the largest of these returns at a mass measured in the length of a boat, something that on the sonar screen looked less like an animal and more like a submerged wall that had decided to move. Now, a responsible investigator does not stop there and declare victory. A sonar contact is real, but it is also mute. It tells you something large is there. It cannot tell you what. It cannot show you a face or a fin. It cannot distinguish an undocumented creature from a known animal in an unexpected location on an unexpected day. The instrument is honest, but it is blind in every way that matters for identification. So before we reach any conclusion, we owe this file the discipline of running every available explanation honestly and seeing which ones actually survive contact with the evidence. The first and most obvious explanation is ice. In the Southern Ocean, ice behaves in ways that look alive to the human eye. Enormous slabs calve from ice shelves and roll in the swell, showing pale bellies before they turn under again. Brash ice collects into forms that the pattern-seeking human brain insists on reading as shapes. And ice is white. The exact white the witnesses keep describing. This explanation deserves genuine respect. For the majority of the vaguer reports, the ones without specific duration or observed motion, ice is almost certainly the answer. But it does not survive the key reports. Ice drifts where the water and the wind send it. It does not swim against a current. It does not descend at a controlled, steady vertical rate and hold at depth. The witnesses who matter in this file describe motion that works against the sea rather than surrendering to it. Ice is ruled out not because it is impossible, but because it physically cannot do the specific thing the strongest accounts describe. The second explanation is the beluga whale, and this is the strongest card the skeptics hold. Belugas are genuinely pale, almost luminous white, and they are large enough that a brief surface sighting in poor light could plausibly be mistaken for something stranger than it is. The color matches perfectly. But then you open a map. Beluga whales are Arctic animals. They live at the top of the world, not the bottom. The Southern Ocean has never been their habitat. To make the beluga fit this case, you would need to move an entire species roughly the length of the planet into waters where not one has ever been documented, stranded, photographed, or caught in any net in the history of Southern Ocean fishing. Not a single beluga carcass has ever washed up on an Antarctic shore. The color fits. The geography destroys it completely. The third explanation is the one that science actually cannot dismiss. And honesty demands we treat it seriously. An undiscovered large deep-sea organism. Not a monster in the folkloric sense, a real biological creature that simply has not been formally cataloged yet. In November 2025, researchers returning from 2 expeditions to the Southern Ocean announced 30 previously unknown deep-sea species collected in a single season. 30 new species from 1 expedition in 1 ocean. The deep ocean is the least explored territory on this planet. New large animals are still being formally described in this century. Giant squid reaching lengths that were considered impossible until bodies began washing ashore. Whale species unknown to science until DNA testing of stranded animals revealed they had never been described. The idea that something large and pale lives in the deep Southern Ocean and occasionally rises toward the surface is not fantasy. It is, if anything, the most scientifically conservative reading of the available evidence. But notice what that concession actually is. It does not confirm the humanoid figure of the internet images with its forward-facing eyes and its articulated fingers. It confirms only that the ocean is capable of concealing something large from us. That is a much smaller and much more honest claim. Which brings us to the footage itself. Because this is what the title of this case file is built on, and this is where we have to be most careful of all. In the years since the Ningen story crossed from Japanese internet forums into global awareness, footage has circulated. Video clips, images claimed to have been taken from research vessels and fishing boats in Antarctic waters. Some of it has been definitively traced back to digital artwork. Some of it traces back to photographs of known objects, icebergs at unusual angles, a beluga filmed in the Arctic and relabeled. Some of it simply has no origin that anyone can establish. The internet is extraordinarily efficient at stripping context from images and attaching false labels to them, and the Ningen story has been used as a container for footage that has nothing to do with the Southern Ocean at all. But here is what the skeptics rarely finish saying honestly. Identifying a piece of footage as fabricated does not erase the record that existed before the footage. Proving that a photograph is a hoax does not make the sonar contact go away. Tracing an image back to a digital artist does not explain what the fisheries observer saw from the deck of his vessel before he ever heard the word Ningen. The manufactured layer is real, and the older record beneath the manufactured layer is also real. When you strip away the invented face and the internet mythology, you're not left with nothing. You are left with the original puzzle that the legend grew on top of. A real sonar return, a real physical mass moving under its own control in water where nothing that large has any documented right to be. A real cluster of witness accounts from trained observers describing the same impossible features in the same impossible water across years and kilometers of separation. The most important development in this file is not any single piece of footage or any individual witness. It is the direction science is moving. In 2025 alone, 2 major Southern Ocean research expeditions came back with animals nobody had imagined. Carnivorous sponges that hunt with hooks, new hydrothermal vent ecosystems hidden under 2,000 feet of black water, iridescent scale worms from the South Sandwich Islands that no laboratory on the planet had a category for. The scientists running those expeditions were explicit. The Southern Ocean is undersampled. The floor of this ocean remains less explored than the surface of Mars. New large animals are not impossible in this environment. They are, given the rate of new discoveries, statistically expected. What is also changing is the technology. More research ships are working this water every season than at any previous point in human history. Remote-operated vehicles with high-definition cameras are being sent to depths that were completely unreachable a decade ago. The A84 iceberg that broke from the George VI ice shelf in 2024 uncovered seafloor habitats that have been sealed under ice for possibly thousands of years. And the expeditions that moved in to study that newly exposed seafloor found ecosystems that nobody had ever observed before. The Southern Ocean is right now being opened in real time. Whatever has been living in its deepest cold water is running out of dark to hide in. So here is where this file stands as of right now. The most dramatic images are almost certainly manufactured. The internet version of the Ningen, the thing with the human face and the 5 fingers and the mermaid tail, is a legend built on a legend, shaped and sharpened by years of retelling until the creature became a fixed image rather than an uncertain description. That part of the story is folklore, and it should be treated as folklore. But when you remove that layer carefully, like lifting a painting off an older painting beneath it, what you find underneath is not nothing. You find a cluster of consistent witness accounts from trained professional observers describing the same unexplained features independently across multiple years and thousands of kilometers. You find sonar records from working vessels documenting a large, solid, moving biological contact in deep water that no known Southern Ocean species can account for. And you find a scientific context in which 30 new species were formally described from 2 single expeditions in 2025 in the same waters, suggesting that the biological inventory of the Southern Ocean is nowhere close to complete. The honest conclusion is not that the Ningen exists in the form the internet imagines. The honest conclusion is smaller and stranger than that. Something large is in that water. Something that moves in a way that does not match the catalog of known Antarctic marine life. Something that registered on sonar as a solid biological mass and then descended in a controlled vertical drop that no ice and no known whale behavior explains. It has not been caught. It has not been identified. It has not been cornered by the cameras that are now entering those depths in growing numbers. But the cameras are getting closer. The vehicles are going deeper. The expeditions are returning with things that were impossible last season. And somewhere down there, in water cold enough to stop a human heart in minutes, in darkness that does not lift even in the southern summer, something is still moving. Something pale, something large, something that the instruments agree on even when the witnesses sound too frightened to be believed. The camera came back from the bottom of the world with footage that nobody could fully explain, and the next expedition is already being planned, the next vehicle is already being built, the next descent into that black Antarctic water is coming, and whatever is down there in the dark has been undisturbed for a very long time. That is about to change. Let us talk about the footage specifically, because the claim in the title of this case deserves a direct and honest answer. Multiple video clips have been presented online as genuine camera captures of the Ningen. Some of these videos circulated heavily on social media platforms through 2024 and 2025. A few of them are extraordinarily striking. A pale shape, enormous, moving slowly beneath dark water, with a form that the human eye immediately reads as a body built on a vertical rather than horizontal plan. These videos generate millions of views every time they are posted because they appear, at first look, to confirm everything the witnesses described. A rounded mass at the top, a broadening in the middle, something below the waterline that moves the wrong way for a fish and the wrong way for a whale. Here is what makes the footage both compelling and frustrating. The best of these clips cannot be definitively debunked. Definitively debunked means traced to a confirmed source, a digital artist, a misidentified known animal, a staged hoax. Some of the most shared Ningen footage has been traced back. One widely circulated 2024 video was identified as CGI produced for an unrelated horror project, with the Antarctic label attached afterward by someone who had nothing to do with the original. That video is a hoax. Full stop. But several other clips have no confirmed source. No creator has claimed them. No animation studio has recognized them. No marine biologist has identified the object as a known species at an unusual angle. The absence of a debunking is not confirmation. Something can be unidentified without being extraordinary. But it also cannot simply be waved away. An honest investigator does not mark a file closed until it is actually closed. What investigators in cryptozoology and marine biology both agree on is that the quality of the conversation around the Ningen changed in late 2025, when the Southern Ocean expedition results were published. Because when scientists stood in front of cameras and said they had found 30 new species in a single season in those same waters, and when they said the Southern Ocean floor remains less explored than the surface of Mars, the cultural atmosphere around the Ningen question shifted. The question was no longer whether unusual large creatures could exist undiscovered in that ocean. The question became what specific evidence would be required to formally document one if it existed. The bar was no longer impossibility. The bar became documentation. And that shift matters for how we read the oldest accounts. If we now accept, as the 2025 discoveries demand, that large unknown organisms are actively being found in the Southern Ocean in this decade, then the fisheries observer watching something pale and enormous slide back under the surface was not hallucinating an impossibility. He was potentially observing something real that science had not yet named. The sonar contact that rose, held, and descended in a controlled vertical motion was not measuring a ghost. It was measuring something physical that the operator had no category for. One is a delusion. The other is a data point. Think about what the deep Southern Ocean offers to a large organism that wanted to avoid observation. The darkness is absolute below the photic zone. The water is close to freezing, which slows decomposition so that dead animals disperse rather than floating to the surface to be identified. The seafloor sits at depths that remotely operated vehicles only began reaching regularly in recent years. Ice cover for most of the year makes aerial observation nearly impossible. If you designed conditions specifically to hide a large animal from humanity, you could not improve much on the deep Southern Ocean in winter. And we know this hiding worked. 30 species concealed there were formally described from a single 2025 expedition. The ocean kept them from us, right up until the moment we sent a vehicle down to look. The skeptic's final argument is this. If something that large existed in the Southern Ocean, it would have been caught in nets, stranded on a beach, or reliably detected by research equipment working those waters every season. This argument has genuine weight. Animals approaching 20 meters in length leave traces. They eat enormous amounts. They surface to breathe if they are mammals. They exist in populations, not as isolated individuals. If the Ningen is a real biological animal, there should be more evidence than currently exists in this file. The answer to that argument is not a dismissal. It is a question. How much evidence would we actually expect to have from the deepest, coldest, most inaccessible ocean on Earth, where research expeditions are still finding 30 new species per season, and where the seafloor remains less mapped than another planet? The giant squid was considered a sailor's myth for most of human history. Its existence was seriously debated by marine biologists until the 20th century. The first live giant squid photographed in its natural habitat was not captured on camera until 2004. Before that photograph, we had tentacles pulled from sperm whale stomachs and carcasses washed onto beaches, but no living image. For decades, the evidence base for one of the largest animals on the planet looked exactly like the Ningen file looks today. Circumstantial, consistent, impossible to confirm and impossible to close. The Ningen is not proven. Let that be completely clear. No specimen exists. No formal scientific paper identifies a species matching the descriptions. No museum holds bones or tissue. But the evidence file does not close cleanly either, and that is the exact opposite of what most people assume when they first encounter this story. They assume a quick investigation finds a hoax at the bottom and nothing else. What they find instead is a sonar record that nobody has explained, a cluster of trained witnesses describing the same animal independently, a scientific context that now explicitly validates the possibility of large unknown organisms in those exact waters, and a growing fleet of cameras being pointed into that darkness for the first time in history. Whatever is in that water has been seen. Maybe not clearly enough, maybe not with the resolution or the documentation that science requires for a formal discovery, but it has been seen by the right kind of people, in the right kind of detail, in a body of water that we have now confirmed is still producing major biological surprises at a rate that should make any confident dismissal look premature. The cameras are going back in. The expeditions are already planned. The vehicles are already being built for depths that were unreachable 18 months ago. And the Southern Ocean, for the first time in the history of human exploration, is beginning to run out of places to hide. Leave a comment below. Of everything you just heard, the sonar contact that nobody could identify, the trained observers who ran out of explanations while the thing was still in the water, the 30 unknown species recovered from those same depths in 2025 alone, or the footage that still has no confirmed origin. Which single detail is the one you cannot explain away? Stay with us, because the next case on this channel goes even deeper.